Hello and welcome to the easternKicks podcast, a regular magazine programme about East Asian film led by me, Andrew Heskins, founder and grandmaster of easternKicks.com, and James Mudge, our leading writer.
Hey-o.
Each episode we'll be taking a look at the latest films, news and festivals, often chatting to filmmakers and stars along the way. Hello again and welcome to our latest show. This time we're focusing on Hong Sang-soo and his latest film, The Woman Who Ran, and we've got my better half here to help us chat about the film. Mm-hmm. The resident easternKicks Hong Sang-soo expert,
Tania Hall. Hi.
But first, let's get on to that important question. What are we drinking this episode?
Well, that's a good question, and quite appropriately, I can see a bottle of something over on the table with you. What's that? Is it? Yeah, could it be soju?
Ah, yes, it is. Gin Road, Jamsil, fresh.
Fresh. Well, it has to be, doesn't it? Because we're connoisseurs, you know. But what else could we drink when talking about Hong Sang-soo?
Exactly. So on with the main chat. The latest film from that most idiosyncratic of Korean directors, Hong Sang-soo, called The Woman Who Ran, is currently on Curzon Home Cinema, with plans for physical screenings in the cinemas later on, and also streaming right now on MUBI. And in homage to Hong Sang-soo, we're hoping that this will be a very short talk. So what can we say about this new film from Hong Sang-soo?
I think The Woman Who Ran is a really great film. And for those of you who've read the review on easternKicks, many of the reasons for that are outlined. What I would say is I like its opaqueness, and this is something that you either really love or hate about Hong Sang-soo, but it's just a very beautiful, understated, simple story told in 3 acts of a woman, Gamhae, who goes to see friends and rivals in love because her partner is away on a business trip, her husband. And it's just the interaction between her and these other women that she meets up with, talking mostly about men. So it's not going to pass the Bechdel test in terms of a film about women that don't talk about men, because there's a lot of conversation about men. But it's just a really wonderful film. Like you said, it's kind of opaque, it's open to interpretation. I think what's really beautiful about it is that you can sort of pour your own conclusions, feelings, assumptions into it, and so I think most viewers will be rewarded with a quite a different experience from each other, and I think that's what's nice about it. It's one of those films that you'll come out of watching and think about for a long time, and perhaps talk about with other people. And your perspectives on it, I think, will be very different. I thought it was really fantastic. One of his strongest ones yet.
So it's right to say that this is his first one with all female characters.
Well, certainly all female lead characters.
The narrative's based around, yeah.
I mean, Hong Sang-soo has had female protagonists before. His muse and partner and frequent collaborator, Kim Min-hee, featured in On the Beach at Night Alone, and she was the lead in that, but there was still a lot of male character interaction, whereas in this film, in the large part, they're simply unwelcome interruptions in conversations between other women. So the focus really is on these different female characters who, to my view, portray quite different aspects of being a woman of a certain age. One is quite happily divorced, well, not necessarily happily divorced, but content, living, with a roommate. I don't know, she may or may not be gay. It's hard to tell what the relationship is there, but she certainly prefers the company of women. She lives out in the suburbs of Seoul. She seems quite happy with this quiet life, and yet Gamhae's second friend is living the kind of creative bohemian lifestyle, really enjoying the kind of drama of relationships and ups and downs, and and that seems to her to be, you know, a great way to live. She doesn't seem to have any intention of getting married. And then the third woman that Gam-hee meets is a woman who eventually married her, what was then I think her boyfriend. It sounds it's suggested in the way they speak to each other that Gam-hee was dating this guy, and this other woman is literally the other woman. But it's interesting that the one person who's, well, the one woman she meets who's in a relationship isn't really very happy with it. She's quite resentful of her partner's success and doesn't feel he's particularly sincere. He's become a kind of fame-hungry narcissist, and she's sort of really living in his shadow. So yeah, it's very, very much about women. I mean, men turn up, but for the large part they're sort of ineffectual or and unwelcome, certainly. So yeah, it's a very interesting departure because, as most people will know, many of Hong's films have male protagonists. They tend to be characters who are either filmmakers, authors, a bit useless, a bit prone to misunderstanding. This film doesn't seem like it's about misunderstandings as such, but more about perhaps what's left unsaid.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it definitely has a different feel to his stuff. It's just, I think, I mean, one of the things you said there, I mean, yes, so many of his films, I mean, even the ones which have kind of like a female in the title and stuff, they're still essentially completely about the male characters and stuff. Just, it's an interesting move for a director who is, you know, so known for, I mean, basically making the same thing over and over again from slightly different narrative tricks or perspectives, everything. I mean, using not too different a structure, but then there's always a danger for this. I mean, different people had said to me before, like, is this a female focused film, female centric? Is it feminist film at all? Does he seem, is this Hong Sang-soo doing this for a reason to try and like give a sort of female voice to stuff, as I've read a couple of people vaguely suggesting, or is this just another sort of Hong Sang-soo one, slightly different, and it happens to have female characters instead? I'm not sure of the answer. I mean, because watching the film, there is a lot of it just left unsaid, which you fill in the blanks, you know, which he does quite playfully as usual and stuff. So there's nothing for me to say it doesn't feel authentic. But you know, I mean, because his dialogue in so many of his films just seems to be self-reflexive, like autobiographical and stuff like this. So in this case, he's, you know, writing for female characters, and you know, to be honest, some of the female characters in his other films are a bit weak. Like, I think I think you could say that, or I could say that about some of his earlier films. They serve a purpose in the script rather than being like full on characters, because you're too busy laughing at the director or the actor bumbling around and, you know, trying to pick up a younger woman, which, you know,
in some ways they feel like they have got better over time.
Yeah.
I think part of that was quite often was in the casting. So when he had Moon So-ri and Ha Ha, even if her character wasn't there all the time, she's such a presence that she actually brought a lot to the role that didn't necessarily need to be said. And you can say the same with Kim Min-hee as well. She was bringing a lot to the role. But also he is writing, does seem to be, these characters have shifted as well in films like Hotel by the River. There's more of them rather than just being...
I mean, that's one of the things he's always said, that he writes like a very basic version of the script. Then he kind of, you know, keeps changing, adding dialogue and stuff as he works with the, you know, the actors or the stars, like during the film and stuff. So yeah, so maybe it is a question of just having, I'm not going to say better quality female star, but ones that he can collaborate or connect with more in those kind of ways, everything that, which sort of brings out something more. But it's just interesting, I think, because for me he's I don't want to say one note, let's say, like it's a bad thing, but this just seems still like an interesting move to sort of go into sort of dealing very overtly with basically all female main cast and everything like that. I mean, for any director, but for a male director to go into in this kind of day and age now, rightly, you know, you're questioning whose voice you're hearing, where that voice is coming from, is it representative, what it's saying, everything like that. So, you know, I'm not so familiar obviously with like Lives of Women, say, in South Korea and stuff. So watching it for me, I suspect is possibly like a different thing. Because I still, you still feel it's about men in a way stuff. As you said, like it's not going to pass that test about woman not, but you can still feel kind of a male presence, even though they're not kind of there, like Hong Sang-soo looming over the conversation or something. But whether he's the narrative puppet master or the ghost of the feast, I don't know. But
perhaps because he has a group of people he's worked with for a long time now. Most of the people in this have been at least a couple of his other films, and his last films of the past decade. So I think he's got a kind of company of actors now, and perhaps there is more to and fro about the dialogue. But also, his life partner is an actress with whom he collaborates. Perhaps she has a little more agency in terms of how characters are portrayed. Maybe she can say, this doesn't seem particularly realistic or honest. You can only write what you know, I guess.
Yeah.
With this sort of stuff where the dialogue is very naturalistic and not much really happens. There, for a lot of people who are used to other sorts of Korean film, no one gets their hands chopped off.
All time.
No one gets dangled out a window. There's not a guy in a sharp suit driving around in a car shooting at people. This is not, action or horror, or even some of the sort of rather convoluted political thrillers that come out of Korea now.
Yeah.
These are indie films. They are really he's a real darling of the European film festival circuit. He gets really lauded for that. His style is very distinctive. You really do either like it or you don't. But if you haven't seen any of his films, this might actually be a good place to start, because it's quite easy.
Yeah.
Some of them are more complicated. They have very complicated narrative structures. Sometimes he plays with time. He plays with how people perceive what's happened in a conversation. This is a little more linear, although we don't know. There are 3 distinct acts to it. It could be that they happen at completely different times to what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But some of his other stuff. I mean, I think the first one of his I saw was Tale of Cinema, which is basically kind of like 2 acts. And I was more familiar with the other kind of Korean films you're talking about. So the first time I watched that, because I was reviewing it for someone, I was completely lost when it kind of switched, because it is that kind of blurring of, I think in that case it was more like a blurring of fact and fiction, like which is a film or which is the people making the film, or what is, are they playing the characters in this, that kind of side of things. So he does like to have his like little sort of narrative tricks, which is probably why he's such a a mainstay of the festival, the European festival circuit, I think you can call, compared to even compared to other whether you call them like Korean genre directors or Korean art house directors or stuff. He is the leading face of Korea at most of these ones. I mean, even more so than Bong Joon-ho in a way, because I think he's had film. I mean, whether there's Berlin, Cannes, Locarno, Venice. I mean, if Hong Sang-soo has a film, it'll be there. And I think that one of the big differences in him is he does seem to make a film pretty much every year, sometimes more than one a year.
Well, I mean, you go back to 2017 and there were 3 films.
3 films.
That's unheard of for a Korean director. That's pretty
but
unheard
lots
of.
of years there's been 1 or 2 films. Very kind of very few gaps along the way.
It's pretty incredible.
But he makes them very cheaply, right? He makes them very cheaply and very quickly, and they're not these big. There's no special effects budget. They don't have huge. He's not making a historical drama with all those gorgeous costumes.
True.
He has this process where he basically, people get the script on the day and then have to learn it and make their way through it. And I mean, that kind of, I don't think it's necessarily improv, but it does keep it very, very fresh. And nobody knows quite what the setup's going to be. I remember the cinematographer Kim Hae-young-koo was a guest at the London Korean Film Festival a few years back, and he was talking about the process of working with so basically you get onto the set and you basically have to keep up with
for an actor.
Whatever
For an actor, that's probably, I'm not saying it's easy, but doable. But for a cinematographer, lighting departments, I mean, he obviously has kind of like a naturalistic documentary stuff, but he'd have to.
There's the very kind of familiar Hong Sang-soo trick of the zoom,
Yes.
which just goes into, during a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of very the cameras are static most
Yeah.
of the time. He puts a camera somewhere, and apart from moving the zoom in and out, or perhaps panning from one person to the other,
Yes.
he leaves things, which is quite nice. You get it framed. It's like you're sitting across a room and you're seeing two people talking or doing something, and so quite often you feel a bit like an interloper.
I think, I think that's one of the sort of strands of it, especially for his more boozy films, which quite a few of them are on the soju and stuff. You do kind of feel like you're in one of these little sort of pubs, and you're kind of sitting not too far away from the people, and you're just hearing.
And it's kind of helped by the fact that a lot of the action takes place in bars.
Yeah.
It's quite unusual, cafes.
Yeah, interestingly, this is a bit more of a departure because there is less alcohol being drunk.
There is.
There's
Yeah.
some alcohol at the beginning, but
and there's a bit of wine at one other point, but
not so much.
Not so much. But going back to the narrative thing, I mean, some of the narrative tricks he's used in the past have been really quite extraordinary. I think Hill of Freedom is premised on a person receiving a bunch of letters from someone, and they trip and they fall out of chronological order, and then that's how the scenes are set up. And there's another one, Right Now Wrong Then, where we see that completely the same day, filmed two different ways, one from the perspective of one character, one from the other, and it's quite, it's sort
and
of,
just little differences.
yeah,
that
Russian
start
one
to
light, Russian one very light.
But it's interesting. He did go down a line of, I think there's a point where he was doing some very deliberate kind of narrative tricks like that,
Yeah.
and then even things like ha ha ha, where you're getting, you start to realise that these two guys are talking over at a bar, and and they're actually kind of talking about the same events from a different perspective, and they don't, basically for most of the film, they don't really realise that they're doing this. But he went into a lot of films that were doing that, and now seems to have come out of that phase of his of being of a very specific kind of narrative devices like that.
Yeah, what I think there are two things that I really. One thing I really like about Hong Sang-soo's films is they are mercifully short.
No, it's very true. 100%.
They're lovely. They're lovely and short. But weirdly, because little happens, they don't feel. You don't think, oh God, that was over quickly. There's a lot of room in them, with a lot of pauses and time to breathe.
Yeah.
So they don't feel rushed. But it's because the action is small, I guess. It's a very little piece, a little nibble of something. The one thing I am quite relieved about in this, but he does do a lot, is he creates his own music for some of these things, or and sometimes it's just a bit.
It's quite deliberately
OTT.
jarring, I think.
Yeah.
It is a bit like somebody's just plugged their Casio keyboard into the back of into the back of a bad mic link in the camera, and it's distorting quite heavily.
Yeah, but I think in the last film, Grass, where he employed that a lot, I think that was deliberately to obscure some of the lines, so we were straining to hear, because it was set in a cafe with a woman overhearing other people's conversations. So I think we were meant to sort of have the same experience.
It's quite interesting that actually that one, some of those conversations, we talk about, were quite often quite back, but I think with that one there's actually more close-ups of people talking. It was a little bit of a change of pace. So the one of the ones where it's actually should be more we're at a distance is actually more intimate. Yeah.
I think the real, you can really see the benefit of working with the same people all the time, though, because the acting was really uniformly good, and it's very subtle. It's people talking in strange, awkward ways, like you would normally, like we are here. We have pauses, we say slightly the wrong thing. And that's must be quite difficult to pull off, because it is still scripted.
Yeah.
But it sounds very naturalistic. In some ways, it reminds me a bit of Richard Linklater.
Yeah,
he
sure.
weirdly, not weirdly, but his dialogue is very heavily scripted to sound naturalistic. I'm not quite sure how much of what Hong does is ad-libbed, but it does. But it really takes quite a lot of restraint to make that, I think, acting restraint to make that seem realistic. You can't ham it up because it just doesn't work. It would be really jarring. So that's nice too, that the sort of tone and the calibre of the actors is all very good. I mean, Kim Min-hee is beautiful, so you want to look at her. I mean, she's very compelling, in the same way that a kind of, any very beautiful male or female actor is, but everyone is very good. I mean, I don't know if you agree, but I think they were uniformly.
I can't think of really too many of his films where he's worked with. He's had like bad performances with people, or films which haven't seemed natural. For better or worse. I mean, sometimes they're quieter films than others and stuff, but I've never seen one of his where things seemed like overwrought or unnatural or anything. I mean, even when he was working with what's her name, Isabelle Hubert. Sorry, I was struggling for the pronunciation rather. Even when she was in them, everything like that. There was 2 films he made with her, I think, right?
Yeah.
Claire's Camera.
Claire's
Camera is the one I remember.
In Another Country.
That's it. Even when working with her and stuff like that, obviously he's not either a regular collaborator or somebody he maybe sat down with and had a bunch of soju with and like discussed the scenes and everything like that. Even though those like seemed very natural, even when she was working with him and everything. So this is obviously his, a real strength. He has everything, a skill of like bringing that out into people. Whether it's like a trust the actors have of going with him. If he turns up in the morning and and says, "Don't worry, I rewrote your lines last night. No, I missed half the lines are missing. I'd be fine. Just go with it." I don't know. It would be interesting to see the scripts, and see the deviation between, because it feels like there would be improv, but then you don't really hear him being talked about as a director, like that being a big thing. If it was improv, that level of like dialogue collaboration, because he is credited obviously as writer for all the films, everything, which is
writer, director, and I think for the last few producer as well. I mean, it must.
Yeah, it's been for a while producer. I mean, not his earlier films, but for a while he's been producer.
So it must be great to have that creative control when so many filmmakers really don't. But I guess if you're only asking people for couple $100,000 here and there, it's probably easier.
And you're guaranteed entry into any European festival. not that it helps them sell. I mean, his films not many have been released in the UK anyway, right? I mean, or just really small releases.
Yeah, and like properly on home media, you've got. Yeah. You've had The Woman is the Future of Man, A Tale of Cinema, as a double film, single release from Arrow. You've had Nobody's Daughter Haywan. I mean, some have been released digitally, some have turned up randomly on Film 4, but there's not really been.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it's down to the length as well, because you do get a few like 69-minute or 72-minute in there. I don't know, maybe the cinemas are less likely to pack people in. It's just that he's so known as like being more like a cinephile's choice for things. Like if you say modern Korean cinema, most people, you might get some like people say, "No, I like Hong Sang-soo, but I don't like Korean cinema," almost. Because you're right. I mean, most people would think about the Park Chan-wook, the Bong Joon-ho, the sort of genre stuff, which is great. But I think there's going to be a difference between somebody who calls himself a Hong Sang-soo fan and someone who calls himself a Korean fan.
It's quite. In some ways, it kind of closes up the audience for Hong Sang-soo, and perhaps potentially a bit unfairly, because his films aren't. They have these devices, but they're not pretentious.
No,
they're quite fun.
Totally, yeah.
And sometimes I think being put in that box is not.
Totally agree.
There's a lot of humour in them. I mean, there's a great scene in The Woman Who Ran, where these women are sitting at home having a drink and catching up, and there's the doorbell rings, and it's a man from next door who asks the occupants to please stop feeding the stray cats because his wife is frightened of them, and it's just such an odd request, and it's met with this sort of bemusement by these women who just keep smiling, and they don't really give him any in. They just say, well, we like the cats and otherwise they'll starve, and it's just left in this it's actually quite funny. So it's not that these things aren't playful, and particularly the embarrassment that comes with many of the situations that the protagonists get themselves in, drinking and making a fool of themselves, and it is really very, and the embarrassment and the sort of cringe that comes with it. There's a little of that sort of uncomfortableness humour of, say, someone like Larry David.
Oh yeah, there is a bit. I mean, I think that was much more pronounced in his earlier films. I think it's still there, like an undercurrent of it in his the last few years, but. I think some of his earlier stuff, it was much more like the bumbling male director who's drunk and maybe he can't remember what woman he's talking to, or wait, is that the assistant with the lighting girls that that kind of, or is he just deluding itself? He made the whole thing up in his mind because he was too drunk. There was a lot more of that kind of I don't want to say overt comedy, but a lot more of that kind of like Schadenfreude kind of look at this egotistical, narcissistic male fool who's so obviously self-deluded.
Well, perhaps the renewed interest, with the Parasite win at the Oscars earlier this year, which seems like a lifetime ago, when we were sitting here in February talking about Parasite. Maybe that will people will be more curious, and for listeners who haven't seen any of his films, start with this one. It's a really great movie, and if you like it, and you may not, fair enough. Watch some more.
So, I mean, thinking about this, we've got, we're saying that the Woman Who Ran is quite a good place to start with Hong Sang-soo. What other films we think might be a good starting off point?
James, what do you like?
There's none of them I don't like. I haven't seen the last two ones. I didn't see, was it Hotel
by the River?
Yes, I didn't see that, or Grass. Claire, I mean, I thought Claire's camera. I do probably prefer the ones which are more sort of about filmmakers, bumbling directors and stuff, everything. So even when you go back, beside that, like getting back to Right Now, Wrong Then, everything like that, which I think was kind of like one of those parts where he started getting more notice. That Ha 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 and that, I think, were two kind of very key ones where he got
I think Ha Ha is actually a nice a nice film to start with as well. A nice early one to take on board. That it's, I mean, it is without kind of being deliberately ha kind of like comedy, but it is very funny. It is, as we were talking before, it's the one where these two guys are talking about actually the same events and they don't realise, getting drunker and drunker. It's just a really solid starting point and a lot of fun. And you did the performances there. I think Moon Sari in there is particularly good as well.
Yeah, I mean, she's good in everything though. And I think because so many of these films are similar and everything, it doesn't hugely matter, really. I mean, maybe his first few ones are a bit different. Like you say, they have slightly different feel to. They're not. I wouldn't say mean spirited or anything like that, but they're a bit more.
They're immature because as a filmmaker and probably as a person, he was. I think his filmmaking style has matured as he has, definitely. Which is, it's quite nice to be able to see that. I've seen a couple of the early films. The Woman is the Future of Man. I've thought that just didn't really, in the kind of Me Too era, it felt a little.
You think a couple of his, like, what was it, Stripped Bare by Our Bachelors? Like,
Bride Stripped Bare by Our Bachelors. Virgin.
Is it Virgin or Bride? Either way.
It might be one of those ones.
So it's one of the. Well, I get it confused with like guts and entrails of a beautiful woman.
Of course,
natural confused, but they're about the same length. So anyway, that doesn't matter. But no, I agree. Some of his earlier ones are a bit more. Yeah, I'm not sure.
They haven't aged as well.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. That's probably the best way to put it and stuff. So maybe skip the first 5 years or something like that. And
unless you absolutely love them.
You can go back. You should definitely go back and revisit them. I mean, just because you can, as you say, I think you can really see that through his career, like a sort of very nice, consistent maturing and developing and stuff.
I'd also put a shout out for Hotel by the River, which was, in terms of the tone, a slightly a lot more,
It's a lot more
poignant.
Yeah.
It was
Okay.
really quite sad. It's very beautiful, and a little. It's really about a person acknowledging their mortality. I'm not going to put any spoilers in here in case people do want to see it, but it's really lovely. It's has quite a different sort of feel in terms of it's not as funny. And it's not as it's awkward, but in a slightly different way. So that's another good one, I think, if you're interested.
I'd like to see that. I'd
really
like to
good.
see it. Yeah.
And it's quite interesting because that's become more of a little a topic that kind of crops up in his films. Increasingly, I think sort of mortality and growing old.
As he gets older.
As he gets older. I mean, it's very.
Well, he's what, 60? I mean,
Yeah, I think
that's
he's 60 now,
that's
yeah.
what happens, right? Is when you're in your 30s and 40s, you think you're invincible, and all of a sudden you start to realise you're not.
Fair enough. Yeah, but I think most places would be not a bad place to start to that. And there's no, put it this way, there's no films, and though I have to admit some of the films kind of blur into one like a little bit for me. There's no bad films.
Yeah.
At all. I can't really think of too many other filmmakers who've, especially the ones who make as many films as him, who've never actually done a film where everyone's like, that's the standard one to ignore or avoid, or that's the problem there. Everything. I mean, he is. I read one critic. I don't think it was Tony Raines, but somebody said he was ostentatiously repetitive and everything like that, and they said that was high praise. They were being clever, ironic, and everything. But it's true. He is. There's a weird sort of consistency, but sort of it's not like recycling the same stuff over and over again and everything, but to an extent where if you like his subject matter and stuff, if you're comfortable with this kind of like lo-fi, laid-back approach to stuff, which I think you're totally right. There's definitely a Richard Linklater in there. If you're comfortable with that, then most of his films are probably not a bad place to start.
Yeah.
Which is not massively helpful to say. But, I think it's
But basically, you can't go wrong.
Well, that's a much better way of putting it. Thank you.
Yeah, if you stumble upon one, have a go, because if you like it,
then you'll probably like the others.
Mm.
I think it's worth kind of bringing up the influence of Hong Sang-soo, because it does feel, and I think to a great extent it's quite true that this style of indie Korean filmmaking has definitely become a bit of a thing since he's been around. I mean, you kind of start with people like direct collaborators like Lee Kwang-kook, who was an assistant director for Hong Sang-soo on Tale of Cinema, Ha Ha Ha, quite a few of his films, and then went on to make Romance Joe, A Matter of Interpretation, all films where there is a lot of
so that sort of perspectives, playing around with stuff, but essentially still based around these kind of like dialogues and not whether it's awkwardness or just uncomfortable situations, miscommunications, and maybe slightly more humorous way and everything. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and then it kind of goes on with people like Chang Liu, who, when he stopped making very, very art house movies, so Chinese Korean director Chang Liu, who
sometimes,
he went on and made things like Gyeongju with Park Hae-il, which is...
This is a lovely film.
It's a
really
fantastic film, which is named after the city, and it's rather odd thing of being the Shilla Kingdom homeland with the burial mounds all the way through town, which is very strange, and he really kind of brings that in, the whole idea of it.
Those art house films go really weird generally.
Well,
but I think they still play. Some of his art house still plays around with those sort of narrative structures. Yeah, that Hong Sang-soo does, but in a much more. I mean, obtuse sounds wrong, but if you enjoy those ones, he takes them to a much more experimental degree.
And it's quite interesting that he's definitely got quite a lot of a sense of humour about himself, because in one of the following films, A Quiet Dream, which had the star of Breathless, Yang Ik-jeon, he actually has the main character there sitting back and laughing at one of Chang's actual films on screen, at how ridiculous it is, which is quite fun. But there are a lot of directors that seem to be pulling on this. I mean, there are other examples as well, and I think one of the main examples is the female filmmaker
Yeah,
Jean Gaillon.
Yeah, that's was at the BFI London Film Festival in 2019, and it is very similar in approach and tone. It's really it was billed by the BFI as Fleabag meets Hong Sang-soo.
Oh, that's
So the director is the
necessarily.
lead actor in that one. It's slightly
Yes.
different, but it's
Yeah.
which makes it even more.
Okay.
This whole feeling of the suggestion that it's autobiographical is even more so if it's actually played by.
Yeah. It was fun. She's a young woman. It was, I guess, a little more risque, a little more.
I didn't see. Yeah.
But in interviews I've seen of hers, she has name checked Hong Sang-soo as a huge influence and really something to aspire to. It was good. It was no Hong Sang-soo. It didn't have that kind of subtlety and it had the playfulness and the misinterpretation and the very simple setup and very simple filming, but it was just less subtle. It was a bit more like you were being hit over the head with it.
Fair
But
enough.
again, she's young and
How long did it take Hong Sang-soo to get to?
yeah.
Well, it's
But
very
it is
true.
what is nice about it is a female story
Yeah,
written by a female with
Mm.
female protagonists, and yes, she talks a lot about men, but also about all sorts of other things. It's quite an interesting story. An ex turns up and this woman is complaining about a man that she's besotted with, and she just comes across as a massive narcissist. It's quite nice to see a character as unlikable as many of the male characters that we see in Hong Sang-soo films, and I think that's where the tone is similar. You don't have a lot of sympathy for these people. They've got themselves into the men in Hong Sang-soo films are often a bit hapless and
Very. They're proper.
a bit hapless as being kind, but it was good, and I'd be interested to see if she continues along that kind of filmic direction or does something different. But it was a nice homage, and I think he's definitely a person who has had, and I think will continue to have a real influence, particularly on people who want to make low budget.
I think
And
that's a very key part, the budget part as well. I mean, if you're
Definitely.
coming out of film school and stuff like that, you've probably been taught like a lot of Hong Sang-soo. You see your man, every year like at some other European festivals and stuff. I mean, where are you gonna go? I mean, and if you don't have access to much funds, I mean, you could probably, if this films are shot for $100,000, you could probably do them for $10,000 without any be famous in it. You know what I mean? Or if you don't get paid as a director, which a lot of young student directors would be and stuff. So I think that must be a huge part of the appeal.
And I think that the surprising thing is just how big an influence Hong Sang-soo is in China.
Yeah,
You know,
he's really popular in China. His films are.
So I mean,
as
the
well.
obvious point of reference is Q Sheng, who did Suburban Birds, and this splits between, half of it is this very kind of beautiful, almost bucolic kind of vision of kids running around like derelicts, or soon to be derelict buildings in that are being demolished, and the other half of it is adults that are going to bars, getting drunk, having stupid conversations, and I mean he did call out Hong Sang-soo as one of the influences, but you didn't really have to even know that because he's using the quintessential Zoom technique in some of those situations, and being quite playful with the narrative in terms of not knowing quite if this is some sort of weird thing from the past with these children, or if it actually is taking place and it's one of the characters' memories, or if it actually is taking place at the same timeline. This sort of Hong Sang-soo meets David Lynch kind of thing going on. It's quite interesting, but there are it's again, I think it's partly down to that budget and partly down to being doing something that can be digested internationally, and acclaimed internationally.
And I think that, absolutely, and that's one of the other things I guess we can say about his films is they don't have that dive into melodrama which so many Korean films do, even some of the genre ones, as well, even some of the real art house ones and stuff. For the last 10 minutes, they'll suddenly dive into melodrama and a lot of, catharsis through a lot of crying and hugging and confessions and everything, which is totally fine, but it doesn't play as well with Western audiences. So it's not a good or a bad thing, I'm saying. But yeah, you're right. Whereas Hong Sang-soo films or some of these other indie films, they don't go down that route, which is probably why they're more easily digestible at foreign film festivals, and then for audiences, although having said, his films don't really get distributed in the UK, at least anyway. But yeah, I think that's a large part of it as well. Like, you don't have the 2-hour 20-minute running time, and the last 20 minutes is probably not something you're going to be too interested in seeing. So.
Yeah, or the middle half of it where there's just lots of shooting and chasing people around. Which just puts me to sleep. Or
the villainess for the first 10 minutes is, and then nothing else happens, and then there's more shit. But
yeah. I mean, it's nice. What's nice is that the pace doesn't really change, the tone doesn't change, and going back to when Larry David wrote Seinfeld, there was this mantra: no learning and no hugs. And it has some of that there's not a lesson to be learned.
It's not it's not a big personal journey with that kind of usual ending at all.
You come out of it, you think about it, you come to your own conclusions. But what's nice is it's something that, because it's not wrapped up neatly for you, you the viewer, I think, are richer for the fact that you can make up your own mind about what happened. And I've read lots of reviews of it since I wrote the one on easternKicks, because there's been a few out in the press, and it's interesting that although again the interpretation of what has happened is quite different, and it's not necessarily that anyone's wrong, it's simply that we're thinking, oh, maybe this is what happened, oh, I think it's a bit like this. That's what's quite nice about this film.
The Woman Who Ran occurs on home cinema with plans for physical screenings in cinemas later on, and it's also streaming right now on MUBI. You can sign up for MUBI wherever you're based in the world with a special offer we've partnered with them for, and get 30 days for free. Simply head to mubi.com/easternKicks. So that's it for now. Don't forget you can find all of our previous episodes on Apple, Amazon Music, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe and you'll never miss an episode. But for now, Hyun Bae.
Hyun Bae.